The rain beat hard against the pavement, forming shimmering puddles that reflected the soft glow of the streetlights. The city felt even colder at night, especially during a storm, when the day's warmth had vanished, leaving a biting dampness in its place. Rafael pedaled his worn-out bicycle through the empty streets, his soaked hoodie clinging to his skin and his sneakers squelching with every push. He didn't mind. He'd learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. Tonight had been especially difficult. The rain had delayed his deliveries, and some customers hadn't even bothered to tip. Still, Rafael had finished every single task, and at least one good thing awaited him: a meal. When he arrived at the diner where he worked, his boss grumbled, his voice heavy with fatigue. "Good work, kid. Here's a leftover meal. Don't say I never give you anything." Rafael managed a tired smile, thanked him, and took the small paper bag, heading back into his routine. His usual spot was a modest bus stop, with a broken bench and a shelter that offered minimal protection from the rain. By the time he got there, his stomach was aching with hunger. He parked his bike, sat down on the bench, and carefully opened the bag. The comforting smell of hot food filled his nostrils. A hamburger and a small packet of fries. It wasn't much, but to him it meant the world. Just as he was about to lift the burger to his lips, a faint sound cut through the drumming of the rain. A soft whimper. Rafael froze, his hand tightening on the wrapper. The sound was barely perceptible over the storm, but it was there. A weak cry coming from a nearby alley. He hesitated. It was late. He was exhausted, and it could have been a stray cat, or just the sound of trash rustling in the wind. But then the sound came again. Rafael sighed, laughing at himself as he stood up, tucking the bag under his hoodie to shield it from the rain. Something, curiosity or perhaps a deeper feeling, pulled him toward the sound. The alley was dark, smelling of wet concrete and scattered garbage. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of a flickering lamppost. That's when he saw it. A dog. A thin German shepherd, its fur matted and soaked, lying huddled against the brick wall, shaking uncontrollably. Its bones protruded beneath its wet skin, its ears were drooped, and its eyes seemed to plead for help. Rafael had seen his own hunger reflected in the mirror every morning, but this was different. Slowly, he crouched down. The dog tensed, watching him with weary suspicion, too weak to move. Rafael looked down at the paper bag in his hands. He was starving. He hadn't eaten all day. But as he met the dog's gaze, he understood what true hunger looked like. Without a second thought, he unwrapped the hamburger, tore it in half, and gently placed one of the halves on the ground, just in front of the dog. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The animal just stared at the food. Then, hesitantly, it craned its neck, sniffed the piece and devoured it in an instant. Rafael let out a low chuckle. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know the feeling." As he broke off another piece, he noticed the slightest twitch of the dog's tail, the first sign of life he had seen in its gaze. By the time the meal was finished, the downpour had softened to a light drizzle. The dog looked up, licking its snout, its eyes a little brighter. Rafael sighed, shaking his head with a small smile. "Guess we're not the only lost ones out here, huh?" He didn't know it then, but on that night, under the city's soft lights, between the rain and a shared meal, something had changed forever. When Rafael finally made it to the shelter later, The rain had stopped, but the cold lingered. Lying on his thin mattress and staring at the ceiling, his thoughts kept returning to the dog. Its eyes, the way it had devoured the food, as if it were trying to say something. Rolling onto his side and pulling the thin blanket tighter, he knew he shouldn't get involved. It wasn't his problem. But somehow, he cared. The next evening, after his last delivery, Rafael rode back to the alley. His stomach rumbled with hunger, but he ignored it. He just needed to know if the dog had survived the night. When he arrived, however, the alley was empty. Where the dog had been, there was only wet ground, with no paw prints or any sign it had ever been there. Raphael's heart sank. Maybe it had moved on, or maybe someone had scared it away. Or worse. With a heavy sigh, he turned to get back on his bike. That's when he caught a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. A shadow shifting down the street, almost invisible in the gloom. He stared. It was the dog. A faint smile touched his lips as he pedaled toward the shape. But something strange happened. The dog didn't run. Instead, it stood there, watching him. And then, it began to follow. Raphael slowed down, glancing over his shoulder. The dog kept its distance but stayed close, its warm eyes fixed on him. "So you're going to follow me, huh, buddy?" Raphael said, half laughing in surprise. He decided to call him Shadow right then and there, because the animal moved like a silent shadow at his heels. And so, Shadow followed Raphael back to the diner. He parked his bike, looked down at the dog, and said, "Stay here, okay, Shadow?" The dog settled onto the pavement, tilting its head slightly. Taking a deep breath, Raphael went inside to start his shift. That night was grueling. Deliveries were slow, customers were rude, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. When his shift finally ended, all he wanted was to grab something cheap to eat and head back to the shelter. But as he stepped outside, there was Shadow, sitting patiently in the darkness, watching him. Something inside Raphael softened. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone. He counted the coins in his pocket. It wasn't much. Instead of buying something for himself, he went back inside and bought a small portion of grilled chicken. Back in the alley, he knelt and placed the food in front of Shadow. "Here," he said softly. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Shadow sniffed the food and then carefully took the first bite. Unlike the desperate voracity of a starving animal, he ate gently, as if trusting the one who fed him. Raphael smiled, but the moment was shattered by an angry voice. "Raphael! Raphael!" He flinched and turned to see his boss storming toward them, his eyes flashing with irritation. "What are you doing?" I was just feeding a stray," Raphael stammered. "Instead of working." The man grumbled. "No wonder you've been late. First, you start slacking off, and now you're wasting company food." "It's my own money," Raphael muttered. His boss crossed his arms. "If you're late again, you're done. You understand?" Raphael clenched his fists and nodded. The boss huffed, shook his head, and walked away. Raphael let out a shaky breath and looked down at Shadow, whose ears had flattened at the tension. He knelt beside the dog again, scratching behind its ears. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "I'm not going to abandon you." Later that night, after his shift, Raphael went back to the alley to check on Shadow before leaving. But as he rounded the corner, his stomach twisted into a knot. A group of teenagers was there, laughing as they threw things at Shadow. The dog was pressed against the brick wall, flinching away from kicks and bottles. Raphael's blood ran cold. "Hey!" he yelled, striding forward with determination. "Leave him alone!" The group paused. One of the older boys sneered. "What's it to you?" Raphael stood between them and Shadow, his fists clenched. "He's not bothering anyone. Just leave him be." Another boy laughed. "Look at that. A stray defending a stray." Before Raphael could react, one of them shoved him hard, sending him stumbling onto the wet pavement. Shadow let out a fierce growl, lunging forward with his fur bristling. The teenagers faltered. Raphael scrambled to his feet, grabbing the dog's scruff. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to get away. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Shadow hesitated, but when Raphael pulled, he followed. The sound of their laughter echoed as they left the alley. Raphael looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with silent gratitude. "You really are like a shadow, aren't you?" he commented. Shadow just pressed his head against Raphael's leg, as if to say he would never leave his side. The next morning, Raphael was 5 minutes late for work again. He had pedaled as fast as he could through the crowded streets, but had stopped for a moment to check on Shadow before going in. It didn't matter that he worked harder than anyone, that he was exhausted, or that his sneakers were still soaked from the night before. As soon as he walked in, his boss was waiting. "You're late," the man said flatly. Raphael swallowed hard. I got stuck in traffic. It won't happen again. I promise." The boss sighed, rubbing his temples. "Raphael, I've given you too many chances. I need responsible employees, not kids who show up whenever they feel like it." "Please," Raphael begged. "Just one more chance. I need this job." The man shook his head. "Sorry, kid. You're fired." Raphael's heart plummeted. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? He had no family to turn to, no backup plan, no savings, just a dog waiting for him outside. Without another word, Raphael walked out of the diner. Shadow was still sitting patiently near the bike rack. As soon as the dog saw the sadness on Raphael's face, his ears perked up and his tail gave a hopeful wag, until he sensed something was wrong. Raphael sighed, kneeling to scratch Shadow's ears. "Well," he said, his voice thick, "I guess it's just you and me now, huh?" Shadow nuzzled his arm, as if to say he didn't care, as long as they were together. Raphael rode back to the shelter, his bike splashing through puddles, his mind a storm of doubt. What would he do now? How would he eat? How would he protect Shadow? As he reached the shelter's gate, his stomach churned with anxiety. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe he could keep Shadow hidden a little longer. He had barely stepped inside before the head of the home, Donna Marisa, found him. Her firm voice echoed down the hall, making everyone stop and stare. Raphael froze. Seeing the look in her eyes, he knew she had noticed Shadow, who had followed him in discreetly. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the dog. Raphael immediately stepped in front of Shadow. "He won't hurt anyone, I swear." "You know the rules," she replied sharply. "No animals are allowed. This is a home for children, not for strays." Raphael's jaw tightened. "He's not a stray." Donna Marisa crossed her arms. "Then you need to take him away, because he cannot stay here." Raphael's fingers curled into fists. "He has nowhere else to go," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Then you have a choice. Either the dog goes, or you go." A heavy silence fell over the hallway. Raphael's heart ached. Shadow was the only thing he had. With his hand still resting on the dog's damp fur, he already knew the answer. Lifting his chin to meet Donna Marisa's gaze, he said, I choose him. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she sighed in exasperation, pointed to the door, and said, Then leave. Rafael swallowed hard, and without looking back, walked out into the cold night, with Shadow trotting silently at his side. The wind was picking up now, cutting through his wet clothes with a cruel precision. As they reached the edge of the neighborhood, his hands were trembling, not just from the cold, but from the stark reality of what had just happened. He had nothing left, no home, no job, just a few crumpled bills in his pocket and a loyal dog who was just as lost as he was. Raphael pulled his hoodie tighter and looked down at Shadow, who was watching him intently. Forcing a smile, he sighed. Well, I guess we're really on our own now, huh? Shadow leaned against him, and together they wandered into the dark streets, searching for a place to take shelter. As the night deepened and the cold grew even more bitter, Raphael began to wonder if they would make it. The wind howled through the city's empty streets. Raphael wrapped his hoodie tighter around himself, his breath turning to mist in the frigid air. An ache of hunger twisted in his stomach, and his limbs felt numb with exhaustion. Shadow walked close beside him, his ears alert to every sound. They walked for hours, searching for a safe place to rest. Raphael had considered an abandoned warehouse a few blocks away, but it was already crowded with others who had nowhere to go. The park was out of the question, far too dangerous after dark. He was running out of options. Then, a sudden cry tore through the silence. Raphael's head snapped up. There, under the flickering light of a lone street lamp, a man was struggling against two figures in hoodies, clearly the victim of a mugging. Without a second thought, Raphael dropped his bicycle and ran, shouting, "Hey!" His voice sliced through the cold air. The attackers froze, startled. Raphael saw an older gentleman, probably in his 60s, desperately clutching his wallet. One of the assailants shoved him hard, sending him sprawling to the pavement. Rage surged through Raphael. He didn't hesitate, lunging forward and grabbing the first thug's arm, yanking him back. The man grunted and swung a clumsy punch at Raphael, who barely managed to dodge, stumbling backward. That's when a deep, menacing growl echoed in the air. Shadow, the dog, darted between Raphael and the attackers, baring his teeth, the fur on his back bristling. His growl was low, but filled with a palpable danger that reverberated down the deserted street. The muggers hesitated, and then Shadow unleashed a ferocious bark. That was all it took. The thugs fled into the darkness. Raphael let out a shaky breath and turned to the fallen gentleman, who was clutching his chest, gasping for air, his wallet still in hand. Kneeling beside him, Raphael asked, "Sir, are you all right?" The man looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and gratitude. I think so," he managed. Helping him to his feet, Raphael stayed by his side while Shadow stood guard, a silent, watchful angel. The man finally looked directly at Raphael. "You saved me," he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. Raphael just shrugged. "You looked like you needed help." After a moment of silence, the man offered a slow smile. "My name is Juliano Mendez, and I think we need to talk." Juliano Mendez was not just anyone. He was a well-known businessman, the owner of one of the city's largest security firms. But in that moment, sitting on the cold curb and dusting off his expensive suit jacket, he was simply an old man who had been saved by a young man and his dog. "Are you sure you're okay?" Giuliano asked, his breath still ragged. "I should be asking you that, son. What you did took real courage." Rafael glanced at Shadow, who remained protectively at his side. It wasn't just me. Shadow helped too. Giuliano's eyes widened as he looked at the dog. Rafael furrowed his brow. Giuliano approached slowly, asking, "Where did you find this dog?" Rafael hesitated for a moment. "A few days ago. I was starving. I gave him some of my food. He hasn't left my side since." Giuliano crouched down, examining Shadow carefully. The dog watched him, unmoving, not growling, just staring as if trying to recall something. In a low voice, the man murmured, "Luar." Rafael blinked. Shadow's ears perked up, and his tail gave a slight, hesitant wag. Giuliano's breath hitched. "My God," he exclaimed. "Could it really be you?" Rafael was confused. "You know him?" Giuliano took a deep breath and stood up. "This dog isn't just a stray. He was mine. His name is Luar. He was our family's guard dog. We've had him since he was a puppy, 2 years ago. He disappeared during a break-in. The robbers tried to take him, but he fought back. After an accident, we never saw him again." Rafael looked at Shadow, who was now staring at Giuliano with a look of recognition he had never seen before. Giuliano's voice broke with emotion. "I thought he was lost forever. We searched for weeks. I never imagined I'd find him again." Rafael swallowed hard. He knew what was coming next. Giuliano would surely want his dog back. After all, Luar was his family. Giuliano turned to Rafael, his face serious, and asked gently, "But he won't leave you, will he?" A lump formed in Rafael's throat. Luar had a real home, a home Rafael had never known. And yet, the dog stood by him, loyal and unwavering. Giuliano watched the two of them for a long moment before letting out a quiet laugh. "You two are really something special," he murmured. Rafael braced himself for the inevitable demand to return the dog. But instead, Giuliano smiled. "You saved my life tonight, and his. So I think it's only fair that I help you." Rafael's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Giuliano placed a hand on his shoulder. "I want to help you, kid. Not just with a job or money. I want to give you a real home." Rafael was speechless. "A home?" Giuliano nodded. "I lost Luar once. I'm not going to lose him again. And I don't think he's willing to leave you, either." Rafael looked at Shadow, now revealed as Luar, who wagged his tail shyly, as if waiting for him to understand. For the first time in his life, Rafael felt a glimmer of hope. A future. A home. The days of cold nights and an empty stomach seemed a distant memory. Though he sometimes woke up fearing he was back on the streets, every time he opened his eyes, he found himself in a real place, in a warm bed, in a house that finally felt like home. Giuliano kept his promise. Rafael finally had a place to belong. He wore clothes that weren't torn, ate real meals instead of scraps, and for the first time in years, he could see a future ahead of him. Giuliano enrolled him in school, insisting that Rafael deserved a chance to fight for his dreams. At first, he was hesitant. After so long just thinking about survival, imagining a future felt strange. But slowly, he began to believe. And through it all, Shadow, or rather Luar, never left his side. The dog that was once a starving stray was now strong, well-fed, and genuinely happy. And no matter how much things changed, one thing remained constant. Luar followed Rafael everywhere he went, waited for him at the school gate, and curled up at his feet during late nights of studying. In the end, Luar had not only returned to Giuliano, but had found his true home with Rafael. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple, Rafael sat on the steps of his new home, watching the first stars appear. Luar lay beside him, his fur rustling in the breeze, his ears attuned to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Rafael reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a simple sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, and it made him smile, reminding him of where it all began. Without a word, he tore the sandwich in half and placed one piece in front of Luar. The dog looked up for a moment and gently took the piece, just as he had on that first rainy night in the alley. Rafael chuckled softly, stroking Luar's head. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" Luar wagged his tail and rested his head on Rafael's arm. Rafael sighed, and for the first time as he looked up at the starry sky, he wasn't worried about where he would sleep or how he would survive the next day. For the first time, he wasn't alone. Sitting there, with his best friend by his side and a future ahead of him, Rafael finally understood that kindness is never wasted. It always returns, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Rafael's story proves that the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever. A simple shared meal on a rainy night led to an unbreakable bond, a second chance, and a future filled with hope. Luar was once just a stray, and Rafael just a boy fighting to survive. But together, they found what they had always been searching for: a home, a family, and a reason to believe in something bigger than themselves. Kindness, no matter how small, always finds its way back to us, in ways we can never imagine. If this story touched your heart, share it to help spread the message that compassion can change the world, one gesture at a time.